And greetings from Technocracy News and Trends. This is Patrick Wood, Editor-in-Chief of Technocracy News and Trends. Today is April 27. The year is 2020, and I hope you are all surviving the great panic of 2020. That's what I'm calling it now. Yes, there's a lot of people sick out there. Yes, there is a virus. Nobody's denying that. Yes, people have gotten very sick, some people, and some people have died. This is always a tragedy, of course, when anybody dies, and we empathize and sympathize with anybody who's lost a family member or a friend. It's just a horrible thing when you have somebody unexpectedly ripped away from you. So we're not denying any of that. But what we are saying is that the narrative surrounding the coronavirus from the get-go was hijacked, manipulated, and controlled by a group of people who could care less who died and who lived. And so just to start out this discussion today, and this is the only thing in the news cycle, by the way, so we got to talk about it. I'll be so glad when it's over and we don't have to, but I'm afraid it's going to last for a very long time in one form or another, because the people manipulating the narrative are not going away. And right now, they have control of the printing press, so to speak, that is the global media. What I want to do is go back to an article that I wrote a month ago, again, just to revisit it for a minute if you didn't see this last time around. The title of the article is The Common Roots of Climate Change and COVID-19 Hysteria. And I smelled a rat a month ago. I can't explain what really led me into this research other than the fact that I just smelled a rat. Here's the rat I smelled. The narrative and the tone of the content of the Great Panic of 2020 seemed eerily similar to the tone of the panic surrounding the climate change alarmism. We've all seen this in the news recently, like with Greta Thunberg getting all the kids in the world to strike and to go home from school and shame their parents into doing something. There was a certain ring to it that was just undeniable. And so that's kind of been something I've watched for years and years. I thought, I've got to find out what's going on here. That's why I wrote this article. It took me back to Imperial College in London, a sustainable development university, an action-oriented, an activist university, by the way. They call themselves a global university. What that means is they're given to activism. They don't want to measure their achievements by academic awards and scholarships and things like that. They want to measure their achievement and value according to the social impact that they can have. And this is why universities like Imperial have been supporting the climate change alarmists with phony, often just outright fraudulent data models that prove, to them anyway, that global warming is a real thing and that we're all going to burn up in 20 years or 10 years or 12 years or whatever. And lo and behold, Imperial College was the first one to blow the whistle on the pandemic. They've been waiting for this. They tried to do it before, but they succeeded with this one. And a professor there, Neil Ferguson, wrote this study that said 500,000 Brits were going to die and 1.2 million Americans were going to die. Everybody panicked. And at the same time he said that, he gave all of the recommendations, the policy recommendations, to leaders around the world and said, this is what you need to do. You need to close all the schools, universities, and all the grade schools and K-12 schools. You need to practice social distancing. You need to shut down your economic system. Well, now the dots are starting to come together because this same crowd has been saying that very same thing. Let's shut down the economic system to usher in sustainable development. That's what the global warming crowd has been saying. That's what the Green New Deal is all about, shutting down the current economic system, putting it to death. Well, still my research was a hunch a month ago. even though there was good evidence to support this, that their data models were absolutely cracked, there's now more strong evidence that shows they were all wet. So this next story that I just posted 3 days ago is titled "Rigged Virus Computer Modeling is Exposed by," guess what? Real data. Not fake data, but real data. And here's what I wrote at the header of this article. 1 month ago, I wrote, "The common roots of climate change and COVID-19 hysteria that demonstrated the disingenuous fear-mongering tactics of global warming alarmists as they used COVID-19 to purposely spark the largest global economic event in history. Climate alarmists have long wanted to kill the brown economy and replace it with a green form of sustainable development, aka technocracy. Less than 30 days after the Imperial College released their initial data model that predicted 500,000 deaths in the UK and 1.2 million in the US, their whole narrative is now falling apart. But, unfortunately, the damage has already been done and cannot be reversed. Their payload, in other words, hit the target and blew it to smithereens, and now we're suffering with the hubris from this. The World Health Organization is a full-fledged agency of the United Nations, which drives the above-mentioned climate alarmists. The WHO's estimated mortality rate is 20 to 30 times higher than the actual death rate being reported by Stanford University of between 0.1 and 0.2%. The number of actual deaths from COVID-19 would not likely be changed if no stampede was ever triggered in the first place. Perhaps it would only have been a nastier than usual flu season. However, the Great Panic of 2020 has caused innumerable non-coronavirus related deaths and has torpedoed the global economic system. Millions of people are out of work. Tens of thousands of businesses are already permanently shuttered. People that need health care are scared to death to go to the hospital for fear of getting the virus themselves. The reality is that the few fear-mongering technocrats who knew exactly what they were doing when they figuratively yelled fire in a crowded theater will never be held accountable for their despicable and fraudulent manipulation of society. Concerned citizens should stop obsessing over who made COVID-19 and the street corner where it first appeared, and instead focus on the real instigators and their real motivations. This is what I've been talking about. Now, I want to read you a quote from an article that appeared in The Hill on 4/22, less than a week ago. They stated, in New York City, an epicenter of the pandemic with more than 1/3 of all U.S. deaths, the rate of death for people 18 to 45 years old is 0.01%, or 10 people per 100,000 in the population. On the other hand, people aged 75 and over have a death rate 80 times that. That should be expected, by the way. For people under 18 years old, the rate of death is 0 per 100,000 people. Now, this should give you an idea that the real data that's coming out now is completely obliterating those phony computer models that started this panic in the first place. And in fact, other doctors now have come out and corroborated this information with their own studies in their own local communities, saying that the death rate and the level of infection is essentially no worse than a normal, difficult, and nasty flu season. And we all know, by the way, there have been some very nasty flu seasons along the way. And I'm not underestimating or understating the seriousness of certain strains of flu that can really take you down for a long time. I had one time. It took 3 months to get over. It kept coming back and back and back, and I just felt terrible for the whole period of time. That kind of flu is out there. And this one isn't much better. It's certainly been one of the worst we've had in a very long time. Having said that, though, I want to read you a couple of other things about climate change, because this is related to climate change. It's the same people, same data modeling, same outcome, same goal: shut down the economic system. Here was a study that was done in 2012. Actually, it was a paper, not a study so much, but it was issued by the United Nations itself. The paper was called Sustainable Development from Brundtland to Rio 2012. That happened to be 20 years after the initial Agenda 21 document that was produced in 1992. In the executive summary of this paper, they said this: climate change has become the de facto proxy for implementation of the Sustainable Development Agenda. This can't be any more clear. This is exactly what I have said 10,000 times, I think, in the last 10 years, that this whole global warming mantra is about driving the implementation of sustainable development, which is functionally equivalent to historic technocracy. I documented that in my book completely. They're one and the same: a resource-based economic system that proposes to manage and control all resources, not in your hands, by the way, but they want to control all production and all consumption. In other words, tell businesses what they can build and make, and tell you what you are allowed to consume. Period. Here's your list of what you can consume this week. Now, this statement continued. And the next phrase after the semicolon shows the disingenuous intent by saying, but the framework of the climate change negotiations are not always the appropriate forum for broader strategic discussions of sustainable development. See, they admit that they're not always going to lead with the concept of sustainable development because it muddies the water. They want to keep it simple. Climate change is like the cannon fodder, the last thing that goes down the barrel before the thing is ignited. And they want to just leave that narrative alone, scare people, and get them to move towards sustainable development, to do green things. And it's worked pretty darn well, hasn't it? Yes, it has. So I want to read from you a little bit from an old book. This is a rare book. It's called Roosevelt and Technocracy. It was written in 1933. I found a rare copy of this book. There may not be any others. I ended up paying $65 to have it shipped to me. But it was a book I felt, since I was studying technocracy, that I absolutely needed to have. And you can see it's in very poor condition. The binding is falling apart. The pages are almost falling apart. I almost hesitate to take it off the shelf to read you the conclusion to this book. I read this the other day again, since maybe the first time in quite a while, maybe 4 or 5 years. And I was absolutely struck that the conclusion of this book from 1933 could have been written by technocrats last week. It's that up to date, if you will, on what's going on. I have said so many times that technocracy is the bouncing ball that we need to be watching, not communism, not socialism, not Marxism, and not fascism. It's technocracy. There's a different column of actors that have been working in society for a very long time, who were science-based, if you will, who have no regard for the political system whatsoever. They hate politicians. They don't want anything. They think politicians are stupid and ignorant, unable to understand the high level of scientific stuff that they know. Well, I guess if we all had single, double, or triple PhDs, maybe they would respect us a little bit more. But after all, they say they have the PhDs, and therefore they are more qualified to tell us what to do than we are. Technocrats are an interesting group of people, for sure. Not all scientists and engineers are technocrats either. There are plenty of scientists and engineers who do not want to control the world, for Pete's sake. I've met so many. You probably have too. It's only a few scientists and engineers that have somehow got a God complex developed where they think that they know better than anybody else on how the world should be run. People like Neil Ferguson, people like Anthony Fauci and his sidekick, Dr. Birx. They have the upper hand. They have science on their side. Science says this, science says that. Well, of course you're going to do it because science is never wrong. Science must be right. I mean, it is science after all. And they hide behind that mantra of science says, science says, science says. And we should be saying back to them, show us your science, folks. It's cracked. It's pseudoscience. It's not science at all, but you call it science. Well, here's what the Technocrats said and wrote back in 1934, this little book. Back then, books were expensive to print, by the way, so this book just doesn't have very much information in it. But it is, yeah, I got it. Here's how he concluded. In any national crisis, individualism must be submerged. Is that happening today? Sure is. Individualism must be submerged. You must act for the greater good. Not for your good, for the greater good. We're saving lives, you know. We must all unite on a basis of equality. Does the UN talk about equality? All the time. Surely, we are not too hidebound to move forward courageously to an effective and unconventional reconstruction of our wealth and resources. Hello, AOC, Green New Deal. Of course, unconventional reconstruction of everything. The economic revolution is approaching with a greater speed than we realize. Only skillful statesmanship, the statesmanship of a Roosevelt, and sound economic principles, the principles of technocracy, which, by the way, are not sound at all, but they say they are, can successfully lead us out of the valley of chaos and despair into which we are plunging. Are we in the valley of chaos and despair? Couldn't have written any better today. Technocracy is the most constructive plan ever devised for the attainment of our economic stabilization. The gospel of technocracy is spreading throughout our schools, universities, and churches. Wall Street is exhibiting an intense but worried interest, and it is whispered even the Vatican is closely following the progress of this new brainchild of our engineer scientists. Is the Vatican following sustainable development today? Oh, yes, it is. Is the Pope Francis, is he a green pope? Absolutely. Totally into sustainable development. Just the other day, he called for universal basic income. one of the original tenets of technocracy from the 1930s. This is not new. Technocracy will assure equality of economic rights. Equality for the greater good. Can that be considered any more fantastic than equality of spiritual and political rights? Assuredly, he writes, technocracy will come. It is plain that its coming will be delayed by political maneuvering and financial chicanery. Though chastened and disillusioned, that spirit which brought the American people independence in 1776 will carry us through chaos to victory and to heights of prosperity greater than civilization has ever known. What a promise of utopia, of nirvana. Society has never known anything like this. Civilization has never experienced such an abundant economic system as technocracy. That's exactly what the United Nations says with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Eliminate poverty everywhere. Education for everyone. Jobs with dignity. Give me a break. Those are all nice platitudes, but there's no way that the United Nations is going to do any of that stuff. You get down to the bottom of the Sustainable Development Goals, you find out all you have to do is give us control over all production and consumption, then everything will be hunky-dory. You'll see, it'll all be good. Continuing, that we shall have to pass through a period of chaos is inevitable. The extent and severity of such a period is wholly within the control of the people. You're going to hunker down? You're going to obey? You're going to stay home? You're going to social distance? You're going to wear your mask. Radical and immediate changes in both our political and economic systems will be necessary. This can best be accomplished by vesting supreme and emergency power in some one man who has the confidence and respect of the majority of the American people. That man is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the guy that brought us the New Deal back in 1933. And now today we have the Green New Deal, modeled after the New Deal. And Roosevelt, they invoke his name all the time. That man is Franklin D. Roosevelt, to whom should be given dictatorial powers in the approaching crises. We can depend on the innate courage, sound judgment, and true sportsmanship of the average American to gain his objective in a peaceful and orderly manner. I will suggest, Mr. Porter, that's Henry Porter, by the way, the author of this book, I will suggest, Mr. Porter, that if you do such a thing to turn society upside down, rip out the heart of the existing economic system, and play 52-card pickup with people's lives, that there will be no sportsmanship whatsoever left in America, much less the world. In fact, you will foment an out-and-out civil war, the likes of which America has never seen and probably will never see again, because it will rip our country into shreds. Technocracy hates politicians. You can see that declaring Roosevelt to be dictator, and thank God he didn't take him up on it. He did, however, bring many of the same technocrats into his administration, and they survived there for a very long time. Nevertheless, he didn't accept their challenge, but technocracy has never gone away. They still hate politicians. I would advise you, if you really just don't believe me, watch the body language of press releases, where there's an elected politician standing in front of the microphone and some technocrat-minded scientist or doctor or statistician or whatever standing behind him in a advice role, if you will. And watch the body language of everybody in the picture. Unless you're just not able to figure out what body language is all about, you will see who's looking down their nose and who isn't looking down their nose. Technocrats have always hated politicians, and they still hate them today. When Parag Khanna wrote his book, Technocracy in America, a few years ago, he's a global scholar. I've mentioned him, talked about him many times. Technocracy in America showed just how radical this whole thing is. He said we needed to get rid of the office of the presidency. How's that? Well, there goes America. He said we should have a committee of presidents like they do in Switzerland and China. That's a much better model, he says. He said, we don't need the Senate. The Senate is ineffective. They're a bunch of buffoons. Send them home. Just dismiss them. Don't need the Senate. Well, the Senate takes care of the Constitution. No problem. We'll give the Constitution to the Supreme Court. They'll do a good job. They can update the Constitution as they see fit. And instead of having a Senate, let's have every state elect 2 governors. We'll send one governor to Washington, and we'll send another governor just to stay in his own home state. But governors know how to run things because they're executives. They're more technocrat-minded, if you will, fix-it people. This is crackpot, my friend. This is insanity. Yet, these crazy people are what are driving the narrative today on this great panic in 2020. They obviously have more power and control than do our own elected politicians, because they're calling the shots. The elected politicians of the world are not calling the shots. No, it's the technocrats behind them who got them to panic and to knee-jerk response accept their policy recommendations. This is what you need to do. Oh, yeah, I guess we just all do that. And like a bunch of lemmings, literally, the leadership of the world ran off the cliff on this and said, yep, that's what we're going to do. And that's how it's come to pass that our economic system is now still shut down. It's received mortal wounds in many areas. It will take many years, if ever, for some sectors to recover. And of course, some people say, oh, when restaurants open up, it's going to be great. And when, the big stores, box stores open up and you don't have to stand in a line 6 foot apart to get in the store, that's all going to be great. Let me tell you something. The fear will not go away. Right now, people won't go to the hospital that need to go to the hospital. They don't have COVID. They have chest pain. They have something else going on. Or they needed a colonoscopy and they couldn't get one because all elective surgery has been canceled. Or whatever. All this stuff is going on. People are going to stay fearful after the country opens up. Do you think restaurants are going to be just as full as they were before? I don't think so. Do you think that people are going to flock to stores and to sports events with, at least without their masks, I guess, because they're afraid of getting the virus, just like they are today? This fear will not just disappear. And in any case, the financial sector has taken a horrible blow. Oil the other day, as I mentioned, crashed, went down $43 below zero. I'm still not sure how that's possible, but it did. People were paying the contract holders, not the other way around. And this madness continues today in the financial markets. We may get through this with our skin. I hope and pray we will, and you should too. But at least be a realist to understand who's controlling the narrative. They are not going to go away because they haven't even been clearly identified to the public yet. That's one reason I'm doing these videos, to give people some information that would help them do that. And by the way, I hope you share this video with everybody that you know. It's not the best in the world. I realize that. That's not the point. The information is what counts. I've been after this fox for over 45 years now. I've seen almost everything that there is to see in the political economic world. And I studied along with Anthony Sutton back in the 70s to break down the new international economic order, as it was called, with the Trilateral Commission. And I followed it all the way through ever since. And folks, there's an unbroken trail of evidence that these were the people that brought everything we have today on top of us today. Only we can throw it off. America rejected technocracy back in the 1930s and early 40s when capitalism didn't die and it recovered thanks to, heaven forbid, World War II. The economic engine started up again. Well, we rejected it back then. It's theoretically possible we could reject it again. But Americans need to wake up and understand the clear and present danger to our country. And if you thought these were just a bunch of pikers who just occasionally got some statement in somewhere, don't ever forget that they are the ones that shut down the world economic system. They were the ones that did that. And if they can do that, they can probably do a lot of other things as well. So let's take a lesson from this. America, reject technocracy and reject technocrats. It's not that we shouldn't have scientific advisors advising our elected representatives. Absolutely, we should. But we should not put them into a position of power and control to tell America what America should do. That is deadly. I'm Patrick Wood for Technocracy News and Trends. I hope you have a great week. Stay safe.